Now, the only reason the Israeli government is saying, all right, we'll finally allow some food in, just give them a little food. Not all of them, just like little crumbs to get in, is because they watch the world, the part of the world that has always been most fanatically and unconditionally pro-Israel, finally say, I can't associate myself with this any longer. I have to speak out against it. It's starting to reach one of those levels of criminality and atrocity and just inhumane genocide that people are starting to realize, like, what is going to be of my life if the true extent of what has happened comes out? And I was one of those people who encouraged it and supported it. And then even as the true extent of the criminality emerged, I never said anything. I was too cowardly. This is what's going on in a lot of people's brains, including people who have long supported Israel and specifically the war in Gaza. One of the most pro-Israel journals in the West has long been The Economist. They have vocally and vehemently supported the Israeli destruction of Gaza, and yet on May 8th, just last week, they published an article entitled "The War in Gaza Must End. America should press Benjamin Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire, then press Hamas to disarm." And here's what they said, quote, "This time, Israeli officials insist things will be different. On May 5th, the cabinet approved a new plan for Gaza. There is no reason to believe that they are right. For a start, the operation is unlikely to free the hostages who remain imprisoned in Gaza. The only people who benefit from continuing the war are Mr. Netanyahu, who keeps his coalition intact, and his far-right allies, who dream of emptying Gaza and rebuilding Jewish settlements there. Food should not be used as a weapon. Israel must allow aid into Gaza and let charities distribute it. Some will be stolen by Hamas, which cares little for the plight of Gazans. That is bad, but the alternative would be starvation." One of the few newspapers equal to The Economist in terms of just being longtime spokespeople for the establishment, longtime supporters of Israel, is the Financial Times. And right around the same time, May 6th, they published an editorial with this title, "The West's Shameful Silence on Gaza. The U.S. and Europeans should do more to restrain Benjamin Netanyahu," and basically went through the criminality of the war, how it went so much further than anybody anticipated, which is ridiculous. The one thing I will give the Israelis credit for is that they never hid their true intentions. I mean, they gave the idiots in the West who just blindly defend them some scripts to read about the hostages, and Hamas or whatever, but they were, even before October 7th, they were extremely clear. They want the West Bank and Gaza as their own. They wanted all Palestinians gone. They believe God gave them that land. And not only are they taking land in Lebanon and in Syria, lots of it, for themselves, all using U.S. weapons and U.S. money. They're now bombing the West Bank, clearing out the West Bank, forcing people out of their homes, letting these maniacal settlers, many of which come from the United States, not just under the nose of the IDF, but with the affirmative protection of the IDF, driving Palestinians out of their homes and taking them for themselves. But that was the plan in Gaza all along. Probably the most pro-Israel pundit in all of the United States, and probably the most influential when it comes to liberal American Jews' views of Israel, is Tom Friedman. He loves Israel. He constantly has been in Israel. He used to be a reporter in Jerusalem. He is a very vocal and passionate Zionist. And yet on May 9th, he published an op-ed in the New York Times with this headline, quote, "This Israeli government is not our ally." Quote, "The notion that Israel has a government that is no longer behaving as an American ally and should not be considered as such is a shocking and bitter pill for Israel's friends in Washington to swallow. But swallow it they must. I have zero sympathy for Hamas. I think it is a sick organization that has done enormous damage to the Palestinian cause. It is hugely responsible for the human tragedy that is Gaza today. Hamas's leadership should have released its hostages and left Gaza a long time ago, removing any excuse for Israel to resume the fighting." That just gives you a sense for how dedicated he still is to the script of whose fault this is. But he nonetheless says, but Netanyahu's plan to reinvade Gaza is not to stand up a moderate alternative to Hamas led by the Palestinian Authority. It is for a permanent Israeli military occupation whose unstated goal will be to pressure all Palestinians to leave. This is a prescription for a permanent insurgency, a Vietnam on the Mediterranean. And the reason he's saying that the government who's doing that can't be considered a U.S. ally is because it, for decades, has been the U.S. position that is extremely damaging to American interests for this Palestinian-Israeli conflict to go unresolved without a two-state solution, because it impedes America's ability to do business in the Middle East. It causes anti-American hatred, because everyone knows that the only reason Israel gets away with all of this is because the United States, the most powerful military in the world in history, the biggest economy in the world, just forces American taxpayers to pay for it all. And even deploys military assets, put service members in the United States in harm's way to always defend Israel, no matter how many wars it starts. And so even Tom Friedman is saying, if they're going to reinvade Gaza and take it over, as they're clearly wanting to do, or annex the West Bank, the level of hatred, not just toward Israel, but the United States and the Middle East, will be out of control. Another very vocal supporter of Israel, Piers Morgan, on May 16th, posted the following, quote, "Another day, another horrific massacre in Gaza. This cannot go on. Netanyahu is out of control and must be stopped." Now, a lot of this is just conscience clearing. I watched this happen during the Iraq War. At the beginning, all the people who were opposed to the Iraq War were treated as like dirty leftists and communists and America haters and pro-terrorists. And then once the decent, respected establishment realized that they were right and that they had to admit it, they kind of came in with this posture like, the real voices that matter are here now to say that this war is wrong. And even though, yeah, these people over here have been saying it from the start, they don't count. They weren't saying it for the right reasons. We are the authoritative voices, and when we say it's wrong, that's when it's wrong. And that's exactly what they're doing now. They're pretending like there's something about this war that was unpredictable, that it went to too many dark places. It was so obvious it was going to go here from the start. Here's an Israeli citizen who is a self-described passionate Zionist, believes strongly in the state of Israel, Shail Ben Ephraim. He's a fairly prominent commentator in Israel. And he said this on May 1st, quote, "It gives me no pleasure to do this, but it has to be done. I have thought long and hard about it, and Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Here's my full explanation of why and how I reached that conclusion." And he goes on to explain that he used to vehemently object to the use of genocide for what Israel was doing. He used to get angry about it. And now he realizes that's the only term for it. Outside of the United States, probably the two most dedicated and devoted supporters of Israel are the UK and Germany. Germany because they're still trying to repent for the guilt they feel, absolve themselves of the guilt they feel from World War II and the Holocaust. And ironically, I guess they think that giving weapons and money to the Israelis to help them ethnically cleanse and commit genocide against the Palestinians is a way to repent for their sins from 65 years ago. But the UK is even more devoted to Israel, and yet members of parliament from the Conservative Party, the Tories, are starting to stand up and say, I've supported Israel my whole life, I supported this war, but I have to say I apologize for that I was wrong, and I see that I'm wrong now. Here's Edward Lee, very standard conservative, a Tory member of the House of Commons, and here's what he said on May 14th.
I've been a member of the Conservative Friends of Israel for over 40 years, longer than anybody here. And Hamas is a brutal terrorist organization that hides people, their own fighters, under hospitals. But it's frankly unacceptable to recklessly bomb a hospital. It's unacceptable to starve a whole people. Is the minister aware that many friends of Israel worldwide, notwithstanding narrow legal definitions, are asking this moral question: when is genocide not genocide?
Mr. Speaker, I have heard in recent weeks a series of very powerful interventions from the benches opposite, and I take them seriously with the weight that they hold, particularly from the Father of the House and my neighbour in Lincolnshire. We will not move towards making determinations from dispatch boxes on questions of legal determination, but that does not mean we will wait, Mr. Speaker. The preliminary judgments of the ICJ and the provisional measures that they set out are important, and we will abide by them.
So interestingly, you have the conservative members of the parliament, including this guy who for 40 years has been in the Friends of Israel group. I don't know why these people get elected to represent the British people and then immediately go and join the Friends of Israel caucus, but whatever. That's just part of what conservatives and members of Labour have long done in the UK, just like the United States. If you're elected to Congress, it means you have to go make pilgrimage to Israel. You have to hold press conferences on it every day. You have to post about it every day. You have to introduce pro-Israel resolutions every day. But even he's saying, look, this is too much. And that he wasn't the only one. Here from The Independent on March 4th, MPs report witnessing armed intimidation by Israeli settlers in the West Bank. Senator Edward Lee and Uma Kumaran were among those to recount their experiences. And there was a separate MP who stood up and actually apologized for his support for Israel in this war, saying, I was totally wrong. Earlier today, there was a joint statement from three countries long vocally pro-Israel, the United Kingdom, France, and Canada. They issued a joint statement on the situation in Gaza and the West Bank, and this is what they said, quote, we strongly oppose the expansion of Israel's military. We strongly oppose the expansion of Israel's military operation in Gaza. The level of human suffering in Gaza is intolerable. Yesterday's announcement that Israel will allow a basic quantity of food into Gaza is wholly inadequate. We call on the Israeli government to stop its military operation in Gaza and immediately allow humanitarian aid to enter. This must include engaging with the UN to ensure a return to delivery of aid in line with humanitarian principles. The Israeli government's denial of essential humanitarian assistance to the civilian population is unacceptable and risks breaching international humanitarian law. Oh no, it risks breaching? It hasn't already breached that? We condemn the abhorrent language used recently by members of the Israeli government, threatening that in their despair at the destruction of Gaza, civilians will start to relocate. Permanent forced displacement is a breach of international humanitarian law. We will not stand by while the Netanyahu government pursues these egregious actions. If Israel does not cease the renewed military offensive and lifts its restrictions on humanitarian aid, we will take further concrete actions in response. Oh, that must be so scary for Netanyahu. I bet he's traumatized that Canada and France and the UK are saying, if you don't stop, we're going to take real concrete actions. These countries are arming Israel. They paid for a big part of the war. They diplomatically support Israel. And now they finally got around to we better issue a statement condemning it so we have clean consciences so that when we die, no one can say that we didn't speak up. They go on, quote, we oppose any attempt to expand settlements in the West Bank. Israel must halt settlements which are illegal and undermine the validity of a Palestinian state and the security of both Israelis and Palestinians. We will not hesitate to take further actions, including targeting sanctions. This is just ass covering by people who are increasingly realizing what they applauded, what they enabled. It's like people who joined the Nazi Party in 1938, 1939, 1940, 41. And then by 1944, they're like, you know what? I think we've gone too far. I'm going to renounce my membership in the Nazi Party. Or like the people who supported the war in Iraq. And then 8 years later, we're like, maybe this is a mistake. Or like the people who supported the war in Vietnam. And then, 2 million Vietnamese later and 60,000 American troops later lost their lives. And they said, I don't know, it's starting to seem like this is probably going too far. I'm going to start to speak out about this 10 years into the war. Here is Germany, which as I said, outside the United States, is one of the two countries, along with Great Britain, who has most vehemently supported Israel. This is from their Foreign Office. And they've had, from the start of the war in Israel, they've armed Israel, they've sent money to Israel, they've sent all their top officials to Israel to stress their solidarity with the Israelis when it comes to Gaza, and yet now they're saying this, quote, joint donor statement to humanitarian aid to Gaza. Whilst we acknowledge indications of a limited restart of aid, Israel blocked humanitarian aid entering Gaza for over 2 months. Food, medicines, and essential supplies are exhausted. The population faces starvation. Gaza's people must receive the aid they desperately need. As humanitarian donors, we have two straightforward messages for the government of Israel. Allow a full resumption of aid into Gaza immediately, and enable the UN and humanitarian organizations to work independently and impartially to save lives, reduce suffering, and maintain dignity. We remain committed to meeting this acute need we see in Gaza. Now, it does seem like the Israeli government's effort to pretend to allow in humanitarian aid is not effective to allow these countries to pretend they're doing that, in part because barely any aid got in today. And barely any aid is going to get in. Everybody knows that. But more so because the Israeli government said, we're not really going to let in much aid. We just need to do this to give the governments around the world an excuse to allow us to get on with our ultimate solution to the Gaza problem, which is cleanse it all. Turn it into a parking lot, cleanse it all, put the remaining Palestinians in camps, and then rebuild apartments and houses and resorts only for Jews and make Gaza part of Israel. And they put these governments in a difficult position because their populations are starting to turn on them. People just don't want to see this anymore. They can't take it. Polls in the United States have showed a significant collapse in support for Israel among all demographic groups, including young Republicans, the only exception being older Republicans who watch Fox News, that demographic. But the Israelis are like an apocalyptic cult. They don't care what. They don't recognize moral limits. They don't acknowledge the humanity of Palestinians. They absolutely consider Palestinians to be animals. There's no way you can just do what they've done to Gaza. Bomb every remaining hospital and mosque and school. They're bombing electricity generators for hospitals so that ICU patients on incubators die. They bomb shelters. They've constantly bombed people in tents. The number of children who are dead, including under 3 years old, is just, as a statistic, is shocking in itself. And there's no question the number of people who have died that we hear from Gaza is extremely underestimated because they only count the people who go through the morgue. Huge numbers of people are still lying under that rubble. There's massive rubble everywhere with bodies underneath who don't make it to the morgue. There are other people who die of disease or hunger who aren't counted because they're not actually killed with bombs or bullets, but they're victims of the Israeli action nonetheless. They've stripped the Palestinians in Gaza of all remaining humanity. I mean, they go to bed every night with Israeli bombers over their head, being terrorized every night that that's the last night their children are going to wake up. I don't even know how you get through this and then maintain any semblance of life, especially the million children in Gaza whose childhood is shaped by this. How do you function? How do you become a normal human being? How do you ever feel safe or stable? Or it's inconceivable. And as I said, I mean, if I think even if we weren't directly involved in it, you would have a need to speak up about it just because the levels of atrocity are so severe. Being starved to death and indiscriminately slaughtered every night. Just in terms of what your concern is about American interests, especially people who have called themselves America first. This war is devastating for the United States as well. It's expensive. If it leads to war with Iran, as we're about to talk about, it could be even more devastating in multiple ways if we let Israel drag us into this war. But even just this in and of itself, you know, I know there are people who say like, hey, you talk about Israel too much, you cover Israel too much. I understand that. We do cover it a lot. I should remind you, though, that when the war in Ukraine was raging, we covered the war in Ukraine just as much because that, too, was an American war. And we talked about all the same things. But obviously, I mean, the number of civilians killed in Ukraine is a tiny, infinitesimal fraction of the number of people who have killed the civilians who have been killed in Gaza, despite the fact that Ukraine is a more populous country by a significant margin than Gaza. Just in raw numbers, the amount of civilians in Gaza are way, way more. Even though that war has only lasted, that attack has only lasted 16 months, whereas the one in Ukraine has gone on for, it's in its 4th full year. How can you not talk about this frequently? I mean, there's nothing else like it. And it's a U.S. government policy. And there are events, and we feel compelled to report on them. And also, I think it's important to make manifest exactly what is happening so that Americans can decide for themselves if this is something they want to continue to support. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.